Okay, so we're just going over the aims of the session. So we'll be examining concepts of cultural competency in working with carers and considering the impact of cultural biases and assumptions on the assessment process. And hopefully as part of that, we'll be exploring inclusive and anti-oppressive approaches to carers assessment. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now because basically I want to have some participation from the participants. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share a link which in the chats to something called Mentimeter. And let me just share that link. If you click on that link, it will give you 3 options to answer this question. What does it mean to care? So I'm now going to share I'm going to share the Mentimeter so we can all see what people put in. Okay. Yes, I think that's sharing now. Okay. So somebody's found their way in by clicking on the link. That should open another browser window for you on your device, and then you can put in 3 options. If you come back to this window, you will see what people are putting in. If people put in more than 1 word, it gets bigger. Or sorry, if people put in the same word, it gets bigger. So if you see something up there that you think, actually, yeah, that's what I agree with, put it in again, it will just get bigger. So 6, 7, it's coming in. Okay. So I'll just give that a minute. This is called a word cloud. So like, I'll just give the word cloud a minute to settle in, as 8 people have participated in the poll. You can see in the corner, you can see the number of participants. $24. And again, remember, if you see a phrase or a word there and you put in the same word, it will just get bigger in the cloud. 29. Wow. 31. Excellent. Now I'm going to take the risk of actually speaking to the cloud, though I know that, yep, that's what happens. As I start to talk, it will start to shift in front of me again as more people add. But I can think I'm seeing one thing, some things really strongly coming through here. Basically, caring is about supporting other people. It's about support, it's about sharing, it's about understanding, right? So there's in a sense here that it's more than just material things, that actually it's about sort of emotional or senses of meaning as well as material things. We're getting words like love, empathy, emotional support, kindness, empathy. I think if all the variations on have empathy, showing empathy, compassion, if they, you know, I think empathy could even be a bigger word here than support if they were all combined. To be passionate, to care about something, right? To help somebody, to empower. It's also about maintaining. There's a sense of maintaining, kindness. Again, this personal capacity is like being a good listener, asking, touching, making sure you're safe, assisting somebody, being there for somebody, supporting independence. It's very social worker thing to say. I would say, and I might come back to that in a minute. Empathize, personalize, again, very social work. This is a very general question. You know, what does it mean to care? The reason I'm starting with such a general question, rather than specifically about social work, is because our ideas about what caring is about actually influences which caring we care about, what kind of caring we value, what kind of caring do we recognize when it's happening, yeah, amongst our customers, as social work organizations. So yeah, other ideas coming through are patience, reporting concerns, maybe that's related to keeping people safe, making sure that somebody's safe. Caring is mitigating risks. Maybe this stands in the idea about protection. It's personalizing. Again, this word's come up, I think, more than once, or has it just shifted? It's also about looking after health, maybe looking after people's health. Yeah, all these things are caring. And basically what you're seeing here is kind of a sort of snapshot of the ideas in the room, what we're bringing today with us to this session. Yeah. And again, as I said, this is important because how we think about caring influences how what caring we recognize, what we're looking for when we're doing a cares assessment. How do we know that somebody is a carer, or even if they're, I don't know, dare I say it, if they're a good carer? There's a notion in social work assessments of carers about necessary care. Which care do we see as necessary and which care do we see as kind of like optional, or maybe the service user could achieve that outcome without the care from others? Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing the screen. Maybe just take a moment yourself, have a look, just take in what you're seeing there. I'm seeing a word has grown actually as I was talking. It wasn't really a big word at the start, but it's grown. There's a word sacrifice, yeah? This idea that caring for people may mean sacrificing, may mean giving things up. There's a lot, as well as physical support, there's a lot here about emotional support. So yeah, I just want you to take a moment, take a breath and have a look at what's come up, what's there. And if anybody feels moved to unmute or to make a comment, you're very welcome to do so at this point. Okay, so what we've been looking at here is kind of like what we're all bringing today in terms of what we think caring means, yeah? I'm going to stop sharing this screen and go back to sharing slides. So bear with me while we make that transition. Here's a definition of caring. What does it mean to care? Caring can be understood as all the supporting activities that take place to make, remake, maintain, contain, and repair the world we live in. We care for our partners, we care for our children, we care for our pets, we care for our extended family, we care for our communities, we may care about the planet. We have many ideas about how we care. And in fact, one of the roots of the word care is actually, in the English language, is actually to do with worry, you know, having the cares of the world on your shoulders, yeah? There's a sense about being concerned in this word caring. So it's all the things that it takes to make, remake, maintain, contain, and repair the world we live in, and the physical, emotional, and intellectual capacities required to do so. And some of those capacities came out in the word cloud with things like empathy, being a good listener, support in terms of like physical support, yeah? So this is a very, very general definition of caring, and the reason it's so general is to basically capture the wide range of activities that caring actually refers to, yeah, in our society. I was interested in some of the ideas that came up in the word cloud, ideas like independence, yeah, which is something that very much is pushed by government policy and encoded in social work through policies such as personalization, which strives to give people control, and in many ways, the national eligibility criteria around support under the Care Act are often coached around promoting people's independence in different ways, yeah? And people are in need when they can't do things independently for themselves. There have been some writers, I think particularly writers who are coming from a feminist perspective who would actually argue that like caring is also about codependency, and it's about relationships, and it's not necessarily about setting people up to be independent. And some people have actually argued that what does independence mean in later life? Yeah, as people are in their 80s or 90s, isn't there do we all come to a point where actually we will be dependent on others? How do we feel about that? Is that something that we welcome, that relationship of depending on others, or is that something that we would see as a loss, as something that takes away our independence? It's interesting, I think, to unpack that and ask yourself the question: is caring? Is there a group of people who receive care and a group of people who give care, or is it something that we're all implicated in? Is it something that that actually works both ways? Does the person perhaps receiving physical support, may they also be giving things back to the person who's caring for them? Maybe it's not just a simple duality or binary between caregivers and people who need support. Though many of the ways that we think about care and social work is actually, we think about it in terms of there are certain people who are carers and there are certain people who have support needs. And there are two kinds of people with two kinds of assessment. I wonder what people think about that, how people think about the way we structure care and the way we approach care here in the UK. Again, there's an invitation to unmute if you'd like to. Comments are welcome, or to put something into the chats. Okay. So, in terms of a snapshot of who cares in the UK, in terms of age, in terms of gender, analysis of data from 2021 to 2018. So this is nearly a 20-year period, just short and fairly up to date. We're now in 2021, so 3 years ago. It showed that about 65%, about 2/3, that is 65% of adults have cared for a loved one, including 70% of women and 60% of men. And this we're talking about unpaid care. In the Care Act, there's a definition built into the Care Act that basically a carer is somebody who provides care and support. A care worker is somebody who is paid for care. Yeah. So we're talking about unpaid care here today. And in England, 65% of adults have actually provided unpaid care for a loved one. And that's 70% of women, 60% of men. And the average person, sorry, I just need to adjust my screen here because I'm being partially blocked out by the view, the way it's viewing. Okay, I'll fix that. Okay, so I was going to say the average person has a 50-50 chance of caring by the age of 50, long before we reach retirement age. And this means caring for another adult, yeah? So half of us will be caring for another adult before we're 50. On average, women can expect to take on caring responsibilities over a decade earlier than men. Why do people think that might be? Again, just what's your hot take? Why do you think on average women take on caring responsibilities over a decade earlier than men?
Could be because of our nature, the way we are brought up.
Thank you. So it's because women are more have more caring nature, or more likely to step up if somebody needs support. Is that what you're saying, Cynthia?
Yeah.
Thank you. Anybody else? Any other?
In the chat, Greg, Leanne has said caring for parents. Amaka has said the social construction of women, and Mamta the expectations from females.
Okay.
And Tammy, women are more caring.
Okay, so Tammy is a bit, I think, maybe a bit like Cynthia. Well, Cynthia didn't say that men are less caring, but that women are more predisposed, perhaps, to caring. I think the idea of the social construction, that maybe it's not about innate qualities. Maybe it's the way our society creates. Mamta, I think I heard it's the idea that that people's there's expectations, that maybe there's expectations either held by women themselves or by other people in the family network about why caring is an appropriate role, why caring is something is a responsibility to take on. I think definitely all these things are at play. I think definitely how gender socialized and expectations that come with that, it definitely has a role. And in fact, where men take, who people care for is also actually different according to gender. In that when men take on caring roles, and they tend to take them on later in life, it tends to be their partner that they're caring for, somebody in the same household with them, another adult in the same household, more often than not their partner. With women, women more often than not end up providing care and support to people who might be in different households. They may be members of their extended family, it might be their parents, it might be other relatives, but often it's people who are outside their immediate household. Yeah. So there's some interesting differences already emerging according to gender. Yeah. And again, somebody said gender is socially constructed. The views of gender responsibilities do vary in different cultures. Yeah. And they do vary amongst different cultures within British society. So that's something we might come back to in discussion. But these are just kind of the statistics to get a sense of sort of overview of sort of a national snapshot of who is actually doing caring. So half of women will care by the age of 46, pardon me, by the age of 46, compared to half of men. And by the time we reach half of men providing care, it's 57. So I want to talk a little bit about racialized and transnational communities. By racialized communities, I basically mean communities who, although everybody has a race and everybody has an ethnicity, not all people are seen as being ethnic or racialized in British culture. So by racialized communities, I'm basically meaning Black and Asian minority ethnic communities. And also, I want to talk a little bit about transnational communities. Now, Britain has been formed by generations of migration. Within that context, many families with a history of migration also maintain connections with family who are not in the UK, family in different parts of the world. I think this is true for many families who've migrated from former parts of the British Empire, Commonwealth countries, but also for people who've migrated from different parts of Europe, for white populations who've migrated from different parts of Europe. Now, caring occurs in all communities and relationships. And while there are shared and common features in the experience of all carers, there are some broad issues emerging if we look at the experiences of different communities in the UK. For a range of Black and Asian minority ethnic communities, there can be distinctive issues around language and communication needs. Perhaps particularly where we have older people being cared for, the home language may not be the main language of the may not be English. Basically, the language that's spoken at home may not be English. So this gives rise to language and communication needs. It can create barriers in terms of accessing services. There's also issues around culturally appropriate services and support. People's religious needs, dietary needs, they may not be being recognized by they are being catered for by mainstream services. And also there is racism and prejudice. This is also a factor, unfortunately, in our society. And that can create barriers, there can be microaggressions happening between service providers and between people from Black and minority ethnic backgrounds, people being seen as different, assumptions being made, assumptions about how people will provide care in different communities. These kind of things create barriers, create difficulties for people in trusting in or accessing services. And again, I advise, if anybody has any comments or anything you'd like to add into the chats, or even to come in, please do so. If you want to unmute or add something, I would invite you to do so, or even ask questions. Okay, Megan, can I just check if there's anything from the chats? Okay, thank you. Also, EU migrant communities in the UK often draw on networks of support. Quite often these are quite recent immigrants, and they'll be drawing on the classic networks of support that are basically transnational. The classic example would be parents from or grandparents coming to support with people's care needs in the UK, perhaps just coming in the summer months to provide support with the kids, or if somebody becomes ill, people coming to visit them to provide support. You may have come across these sort of things in your practice. This is something that's going to become increasingly difficult, I think, with the immigration restrictions that are being brought in post-Brexit. And it's something that actually could be argued has been a fact of life for many years for families whose families that have migrated from former Commonwealth countries, because non-EU migration has been strictly controlled for many years, and that creates real difficulties sometimes in for people to actually provide care for their relatives. Yeah. So in some ways, what's happening now with EU migrants is something that's already been happening for many years, unfortunately, for migrants from other areas of the world, for non-EU migrants. So I just want to say something before I move on about this concept of BAME communities, Black, Asian, minority ethnic communities. This is a very wide category, and within this very wide category, there are many, many forms of diversity in terms of culture, in terms of people's experience. So what I've looked at is very, very broad strokes, because it's actually, in a 2-hour lecture, it's kind of difficult to look at every different experience of caring. And in fact, one of the things I'm going to be looking at today is actually exploring, is that something we can actually do in terms of, is learning about caring simply about learning about different cultures and about different communities and about patterns of caring within those communities? Or do we need to learn an approach that actually is more rooted in like an openness to understanding communities, to understanding the experiences of carers, to understanding the differences that exist in the different experiences that may not only be defined by somebody's ethnicity or by their gender or by their families' histories of migration. So another area of diversity is around sexual orientation. So I want to briefly talk about LGBTQIA carers. I don't know if somebody can put into the chats, what does, just to check in for, what does LGBTQIA stand for? And it's plus, but perhaps we could just start with that, these letters. And again, it's okay not to know. That's why you're here. That's why we're here today, to learn. So don't hold back. If just have a guess, see what you think. Megan, can I check what's happening in the chats?
Yeah, so we've just had one message saying lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, asexual.
Okay.
I'm not 100% sure if that's right, but I'm assuming it is.
Right. That is right. That is right. And okay. Lesbian and gay are forms of same-sex attraction. Bisexual is where people are attracted to two genders. Transsexual is where people transition from one gender to another. Queer is a general term for people who prefer not to narrowly define their sexuality, and also it has a history in the UK of being a reclaimed word that was used as an insult against gay, lesbian, and bisexual people. And some people actually choose it as a term of identity. I stands for intersex, and A is asexual, people who have no sexual attraction to others at all. These are all minority forms of sexuality, as distinct from heterosexuality. But they are people that you will encounter as part of your work as social workers. So research into the experience of carers for lesbian and gay people has highlighted difficulties in being accepted as next of kin by professionals, including social workers, and being excluded from crucial discussion and decision-making, for example, in end-of-life care. One thing to understand for people with non-heterosexual sexual orientations is that quite often the life course may be different in terms that, like, okay, with heterosexual people, not all, but many get married, have children. Gay and lesbian people can also marry, and people can marry people of the same sex now, but this is a relatively recent thing. And for many LGBTQIA plus people, Friends and chosen family, research has shown, play a pivotal role in these communities. Now, by chosen family means that people who maybe become family, and sometimes these are based on relationships, like maybe somebody's same-sex partner, but also there can be significant other people, such as friends, who basically share their lives together. Researchers demonstrate that family ties and expectations of caregiving are often present in friendships between lesbians and straight men, as well as between friendships between gay men and straight women. Straight meaning heterosexual, yeah? So sometimes it can be that people are cared for by their same-sex partner, but sometimes it can be that people are receiving care from other people, perhaps a friend who's, you know, they graduated from school with, and they've had several relationships a lot through the course of their life, but they're still maintaining a close relationship, a chosen family relationship with another person, who, because of the strength of the relationship, steps in and ends up playing a caring role. And this is something to be aware of in terms of assessment, in terms of like when you go in and you're, who is actually the people who are providing care, and what is the relationship? And this needs to be approached sensitively. I think this might be a good time, Megan. Whoops, I've just
Do you want to do the first poll?
to do the first poll. Yes, please.
Yeah, I'm going to launch it now.
So I'm asking a question here, and it's a yes/no question. Do you feel equipped to respond to the diversity of carers? Oh my dears. Only 2 people have voted so far though. So let's see how it goes. Okay, we've had 18 out of 35 people, so yep. And it is a binary choice, yeah. So kind of on balance, how do you feel? And maybe that you feel a bit, but if you kind of feel like less than 50%, perhaps up for the no, and if you feel more than 50%, perhaps up for the yes.
Are you happy to close that now, or do you want to leave it up for a bit longer?
Nearly everybody's voted, so I think perhaps we could close that now.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm seeing a lot of people feel very confident. We're having 74% who are feeling more confident than not about responding to the diversity of carers, while we have about 26%, so still slightly more than a quarter of folks who are feeling not so confident. Yeah. Now, again, this is like just a sort of a way of testing the temperature in the room, basically, to see how people are feeling before we go into breakout groups. But I think a lot of people are feeling quite comfortable with dealing with diverse service users, and I think as social workers in a big city like London, that's very, very diverse, that's something that that's something to be very welcomed, I think. But some folks are not feeling so confident, and again, that is okay, because we're going to be kind of unpacking what does it mean to have a sense of competency around cultural issues and dealing with the diversity of issues that different patterns of caring present. Yeah. So what happens if I press this button? Oh, sorry, I just realized I wasn't sharing the results, so folks couldn't actually see. I think you should be able to see the polls now. Is that visible for folks? Yes. Okay, and I'm now seeing the chat, which is great. So thank you, Barungi, Mamta, and Izzy Mazzy for your contributions. Okay, I'm just going to stop sharing the poll. Oops. Okay. And go back to sharing the screen. So, okay. Roughly about, not quite, but approaching 3/4 of folks today feel fairly confident in working with diversity, which is a great thing. So let's flip it around and check in, what do we know about carers' experiences of assessments? Okay. This data is from 2019, so it's not completely up to date, but it's, you know, it basically takes us up to the point of, actually this came out the last summer, so you know it's pretty recent, and it's basically surveys done by Carers UK, and what they found was that 27% of carers in England reported that they had had an assessment or a review in the last 12 months. So that's 27%. So slightly less than half of people, or sorry, slightly more than 1/4 of the people who are registered as carers in the UK had an assessment or a review in the last 12 months. Now, social workers, you'll know that in most local authorities, in all local authorities, it's actually a key performance indicator to have some kind of review in the within the year. So these figures are quite surprising in some ways. Now, it could be that people are having assessments or reviews and they don't realize they're happening because they're being done perhaps as a combined review with the person needing support and care. But the carer hasn't realized that actually that counts as a review of their situation. But then if that's the case, we have to ask questions about how is that being communicated, yeah? And actually 27% was compared negatively with the last time that Carers UK did this survey. They asked the same question back in 2016. And then 31% of carers were clear that they had received an assessment or a review, yeah? So actually the numbers of carers who believe that they've had an assessment seems to be going down. 40% of carers said that the suitability of their home, that their home was taken into consideration when in their carers assessment. So issues about like whether they can maintain their home, was there a suitable place to provide care if they were providing it in their own home. This was something that 40% of carers understood was actually considered during their assessment, but only in 37% of assessments the carers believe that their ability and willingness to provide care was thoroughly considered and reflected in support, meaning that they actually felt that some kind of support was provided to them in terms of their ability and willingness to provide care. Only 37%. So that's like way less than half, right? We're looking at slightly more than a third here. And only 30% of carers felt that their need for support to look after their own physical and mental health alongside the person they were caring for had been thoroughly considered. So even less than a third thought that their own well-being, which again is, remember, is going, as you will know, as social workers, is one of the things that is considered in terms of assessing carers and whether they're eligible for services. Only 30% felt that their own ability to look after their mental and physical health alongside caring had been thoroughly considered. And only just about a quarter, slightly over, said that their need to have regular breaks from caring was considered. So I'm going to pause because I'd like to again invite people to perhaps put into the chats, why do you think these figures are so low? based on your experience, your practice knowledge, why do you think only 27% of people have thought that they've had actually an assessment or a review in the last 12 months? And why are the figures dropping? Okay, this is national, so things may be different in your local area. But thinking about this on a national level, why do you think that might be? And
So we've got a message from Leanne. I've come across some carers who have said that they have not had an assessment when they have.
Okay, thanks for that, Leanne. And that may be well be a possibility.
Not been identified as carers, government cutting down.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to reshare so that I can actually see what's happening in the chat as well. So let me. Okay.
Can I say something also?
Please do. I can't see who you are at the moment. Please come in.
Yeah, I think sometimes also what comes across from my line of work is that some carers are not aware that their role, they are informal carers. They see it as their responsibility. They have to care for their loved ones, so they don't really want, when you offer them the carers assessment, they would decline it. And sometimes workers also don't encourage them and explain to them that there is support available, and then let them know what their rights are to be able to complete these assessments for them. So that could count for the number declining.
Thanks for that, Cynthia. And okay, so you're thinking it's because people don't identify as carers and maybe decline the assessment. Okay, and so they've been offered it, but they haven't actually taken it up. Some of the ideas in the chats. Sorry, I think I was actually trying to share at the same time as seeing what's happening in the chats, but I think I will. Chats. Okay. We've suggested it's declining assessment due to charges. So people are basically avoiding services because they think there may be charges. And I wonder if this resonates with people saying that it might be to do with cuts and to do with austerity. We have some suggestions, and this ties in with what was said earlier by Leanne. Some carers don't even know that joint assessment is completed, in which case it's about how the social worker is communicating things to the carer. It may be about lack of knowledge, that people don't realize that they're entitled to an assessment, in which case, why are the numbers going down? Does that mean that there's less information available to people about assessments? The pressure to do reviews together, it's also an issue because the local about what the local authority care offer is, and respite is now via the cared for person. Okay, so maybe that ties in with the really low number of people who felt that they were being offered breaks, that it was recognized that they may need a break from their caring role. But it's not seen as necessary. Carers may be so engrossed in caring and not realize or recognize that they've had an assessment. Okay, so again, this is coming up a number of times, this idea that perhaps you can have an assessment and not know that you've been assessed. Yeah, and again, that does raise questions about like how the process is done. If the process is very process-led, as a social worker, we're trying to get our assessments done. We've got a very tight turnaround. We've got a lot of cases to deal with this week. It'd be quite easy for us to have a chat with the person, go back, type it up, put it on the system. It's an assessment, job done. But does the carer know that they've actually had an assessment? Yeah. And then that does ask something about the quality of the communication that was going on there. Sometimes carers get offered money and this isn't enough to meet their well-being needs. Some believe that it'll affect their benefits and they therefore decline. Again, that means something about explaining to people what this means in terms of the assessment. Carers feel that they need to answer too many questions, which sometimes results in no increase in support for the person as they would have liked. So basically the process is seen as being onerous, as being perhaps tiring, and perhaps, you know, why make that effort if you don't think it's going to, as a carer, that it's going to make a return for you. Yeah, again, the idea that people decline because it might affect their benefits. Okay, and again, this is something that's, you know, basically it comes down to, I guess, how we explain what is involved in a carer's assessment to a carer, yeah, what it's going to mean. I mean, these are some of the ideas I think we will look at in the breakout rooms. Okay, I just want to do a couple more slides, and then I think we should perhaps go to a break. But first of all, I want to give you some more feedback on, so how do carers view themselves? Yeah, I think there's a very interesting study that was done. Whoops, I hit the wrong button there. So that works. Okay, so let me get to the right slide. Which was about the cultural attitudes among carers. Now, this was a study that was done in 2008, some time ago, but I think it's a really interesting study. It has a lot to teach us in the current moment. And basically, the study looked at the cultural attitudes to caring for family members with dementia among both South Asian, African Caribbean, and white British carers in the UK. And basically, they did in-depth interviews with carers about how they felt about caring, how they saw themselves. Did they see themselves as carers? What did that mean to them? And they basically categorized people's responses according to whether they held three core interrelated beliefs. The belief that caregiving is natural. Now, this is something that came up in our conversation about gender earlier on. Some people were saying that women are more naturally predisposed to caring. So did the carers believe that caring was a natural thing for them to be doing? Did they believe it was an expected thing for them to be doing? And did they believe it was a virtuous thing to be doing? Like, it's a good thing. It's something that has value. It's something that has meaning. Yeah. And basically, they categorized people who had these beliefs. They labeled them or described them as traditional carers. Okay. And for people who in their interviews didn't have the view that caring is natural, or that it's something that should be expected of them, or it's something that is admirable or virtuous or something deserving respect, they categorized those people as non-traditional carers. So basically, and based on their interviews, participants were categorized by the researchers as holding either traditional or non-traditional care views. Now, what Lawrence et al. Found was that traditional care views were held by the majority of the South Asian carers in their study, but only approximately half of the African Caribbean carers and only a minority of the white British carers held the views that their caring role was natural, expected, and virtuous. Yeah. So let's unpack what they found. Now, with the carers who they identified as traditional carers in terms of their attitude or their cultural beliefs around caring, caregiving is viewed as natural, expected, and virtuous. And these carers would implicitly prioritize the person with dementia's needs. Basically, the person that they were looking after came first, and they organized their lives accordingly. they often made decisions around service use on this basis. So in terms of if they took up a service, it was often because the service was somehow seen as meeting the primary needs of the person receiving care. Not for themselves, they take it up, but because it somehow benefited the person who was receiving care. They often would decline services or say, place limits on outside involvement. Yeah. But they still wanted to know what was available. And the reason uncovered for why they were putting these limits on outside involvement was because often they felt that it reflected poorly on them if they took support. If they took support, maybe that was showing that they weren't able to cope. Maybe that was showing that they weren't living up to their role as a carer. Yeah. So there was a real reticence in carers with these attitudes about taking support when it was offered. And sometimes they could be quite hard on themselves, and they say that if they had to seek professional help, whether that was from social workers or from health professionals, that was somehow a sign of some kind of failing in their caregiving. Very strong sense of responsibility, and often a real fear about the future, because they very much think the caring role is something that is their responsibility. Are they going to be able to maintain this going forward? Yeah. And that leads to sort of worry about what is going to happen in the future. So Lawrence et al. Suggested, in light of this, might be an appropriate service response with carers who have this kind of view, yeah, about caring, is that promoting services that are perceived to benefit the person with dementia, and they gave the example of daycare, but you could actually think about this in relation to other types of care provided. People mentioned respite being given as part of the package for the person who is receiving the care. For this type of care, that would make sense, yeah? They want services that are actually, that they see as directly benefiting the person that they're caring for. That also Lawrence et al. Suggests that that it's important message for professionals to be giving these type of carers is that give them reassurance that time for themselves is necessary. They shouldn't feel guilty about having some time for themselves. It's going to help them to sustain themselves and to maintain their caring roles. Care professionals need to understand that offers or assistance are a great value. So even if the person's saying, actually, I wouldn't really need services, it's good to explain what those services might involve, what might be on offer, yeah? Because just even the people aren't at that point ready to take up services, just knowing that those services are there, knowing that there's a way that they can reach out for help, and that reaching out for help isn't a sign that they're somehow failing in their caring role, is an important message to give people. And very much it should be, they argue that we have a role here in educating people, that our role is about supporting rather than substituting or replacing or coming in and taking over from family members in their caring role. So what's suggested here is actually planning open discussion, thinking about futures and how can people maintain this role in the longer term, and providing reassurance that support is available when they need it. Okay, so that's traditional carers, or people with traditional attitudes towards caring. What about non-traditional carers? This is where caring roles are not viewed as natural, expected, or virtuous. Often with this type of carer, they don't necessarily see that their caring role is valued, and they do feel a sense of grief and loss for their other relationships. Perhaps it was work that they were involved in the relationships that were work-based. Perhaps it's social relationships. Perhaps it's different activities they did, and they have a strong sense of loss, that because they're now providing family care, they've actually lost out on a lot of other relationships that were really important and gave them a sense of value in their life. There's a sense of a lack of reward from the caregiver role. Yeah. Now we've talked about some previously with traditional carers, people who feel that like actually there is some kind of intrinsic virtuousness about what they're doing. It's something that will be respected by the community. It's something that perhaps from their faith perspective, it's something that's really important. But there are other carers who actually don't see that this is something being valued. They may feel that like that basically it's something they've been left stuck with. They do feel a sense of responsibility to the person they're caring for, but they don't think that other people think this is an important thing to be doing. Yeah. They often derive important rewards and sense of value from other things they're doing beside caring. They may experience role conflict because I'm saying they do have a relationship with the person they're caring for. They may well love them, but they do feel that like this is not how they imagined the relationship developing. Yeah. It may be that they feel some resentment to other family members who they see as having withdrawn or left them with the primary caring role for the person they're supporting. And often they have very few opportunities to talk about this and to evaluate how they feel about the caring role, to actually speak about it with other people. So Lawrence et al. Suggested an appropriate service response with these type of non-traditional carers, yeah, would be interventions that help carers to reframe their relationships, to think about their relationship and think about some of the positive things that aspects of caring, and to identify enduring or new elements that they value in their relationship. Yeah. It's helpful to give some recognition for what they're doing. Yeah. And also promoting the value of the caring role. And sometimes this means acknowledging that other members of the extended family have not been valuing what's going on. Yeah. And again, there's a notion here from Lawrence et al. That there needs to be some kind of public education, or we have a role in educating people about the importance of caregiving roles. So this means also acknowledging with the person and addressing the feelings of the wider family. If the wider family are like, if it's felt that they're not really being involved, exploring how could that be addressed with them, how could they become more involved. Also, it's important because these folks are getting their sense of value and worth from non-caregiving roles, that they're given some support to maintain those non-caregiving roles. And this is where small amounts of respite can be really important in terms of giving some people some time for themselves. And help them to modify their appraisal of success. So conflict in demands, conflict between perhaps the person wanting to maintain their role in work and wanting to continue working or continue some other aspects of their social life, maintaining relationships with friends or family, or wanting to have a break or travel. That doesn't mean that they're a bad carer. That doesn't mean that they're a bad person. So it's about like helping them to kind of like both to value what they're doing as carers, but also to like recognize that yes, there is a conflict here, and what they need to do, be supported to do, is to try and find a balance. Now, these carers may really want more regular reviews to enable them to assess how they feel. And okay, Lawrence et al. Were a group of medical practitioners in the area of dementia care, yeah? And you've got to, I think in social work, we often like sort of reviews would be changed by a change in circumstances regarding the necessary care that the person was providing. But does that actually give space? Is that going to be regular enough for people who are like who feel that their caring role isn't a source of value to them, or something that is valued in as part of their lives. So again, I'm going to just stop sharing a moment so I can see the chats. I would like to invite people again. What do you think of these concepts of traditional and non-traditional carers? Does it resonate with some of the people you may have met in assessing and working with carers, family carers?
Can I come in?
Please do. Welcome.
Yeah, well, in my experience, like the traditional is largely with people who are maybe the first generation in this country. Because what people normally understand, the welfare system is there to support people. So the non-traditional are largely like those people. They don't see it a responsibility of theirs, but the responsibility of the state. But those that under the first generation who like traditionally caring is the family is the welfare. So the family has to look after whosoever is vulnerable. So they take it as a traditional, that a duty of the family. But here, because of the welfare system, people think now is the responsibility of the state, not mine, because everybody's an individual. You see, so those are the type that sometimes can even say, oh, well, we are more than one. It's not me alone. Why can't the other person do it? Whereas in the traditional, there is a family thing. It doesn't matter who does. Somebody has to do it. So everybody's obliged. So I think this is what could explain some of those differences.
Indeed. Thanks for that, Richard. Sorry, I just paused because I was just checking because I was going to ask a poll question, but based on what you were saying. So I was just trying to sort that out behind the scenes. But I think this idea about people having responsibility to other people, it kind of contrasts with the idea of independence. And that's an idea that came up earlier on with caring, was people talked about promoting independence. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So there's an idea, I think, that like sort of independence is something that's valued in UK society, I think, yeah. And sort of people finding themselves with caring responsibilities for some folks, maybe with that Lawrence et al. Categorized as non-traditional, there's a real conflict that they feel a loss of independence by having to care for people. Other people find, from a more traditional perspective, would see that as like, that's something that they, you know, that is something that they could be proud of, is the fact that they're caring for other people, yeah? And some people are putting things into the chats like, yes, it's about, it shows an acknowledgement of the work they do. It's the experience and roles changing within the generations. Yeah. So, sorry, Rumana, I see that you've got your hand up. Would you like to come in?
Yeah, I just want to sort of speak on a personal sort of level as well. I'm from the South Asian sort of community, although I was born and brought up in England. I think with just thinking back to my parents, my grandparents sort of era, that they, because the South Asian community is so family orientated and they do have a joint system sort of family upbringing, I feel that they value culturally, you know, to look after one another and bring them up. Whereas in sort of in Britain, in the UK, everyone is sort of has their own household, and you know they sort of, I don't know how to explain it, but they're in charge, like they're independent of their own sort of finances and their little family. Whereas in South Asia, it's one head that's in charge of the whole sort of 3 generations, I suppose. Mm-hmm. So I feel that there is a divide in sort of the traditional and the non-traditional. I can see it through my experience and my parents' experience, because at the moment I feel I'm maybe if I was to care for somebody, I'd probably fit in the non-traditional category now. I don't know if I'm making sense.
that was very eloquent. That made a lot of sense. So I think I'm hearing that, like you're talking about, that there may be a generational shift, and people's attitudes, whether they're traditional caring attitudes or non-traditional caring attitudes, may be influenced by generation and by the length of maybe even how integrated they are into British society, and that actually, or into the norms of British society.
Yeah, I think it's a more of a geographical issue as well as cultural. I think there's many factors.
Okay, I want to do a quick poll. Sorry, Megan, I'm just going to put this poll into the. I'll just message it to you. Can we set up a poll? Do you think caring roles are valued in British society? Is that possible, Megan?
Yeah, that's fine. So is it different to the initial ones you sent?
It is. I just realized I made a mistake in the initial ones I sent. That was meant to be.
Okay, no worries. I'll quickly do that now.
Just double checking. Yes. I realized that I put the same poll question in twice on the. That was my mistake.
There we go. Shall I launch it?
Yes, please. So this is a question thinking about the wider British society. Do you think caring roles are valued?
I think most people have stopped voting now.
Okay, so I guess we could close the poll. Thank you. So, and you're sharing results. Thank you. So this is people's. This is not so scientific, but this is people's. It gives a kind of a temperature check for what's happening in the room, and what people's opinions are. So nearly 60%, yeah, of people think caring roles are valued in British society, but we've got quite a significant minority, 41%, saying that perhaps they're not. Yeah, I wonder if people, perhaps somebody who thinks that yes, they are. If we could hear some views from that side, why do you think they're valued? Or why was that your reaction? Again, you please feel free to unmute or to put something into the chats. Okay, we have a contribution from Latifa. Thank you, Latifa. They're valued because they are recognized by the government. Anybody else like to expand on why you feel they're valued? Ian, please come in.
Hi, everyone.
Welcome, Ian.
Yeah, I think to start with, if it is not valued, there wouldn't be a monetary reward by the government.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one significant point there. However, most people appreciate the kind of support they receive when they become vulnerable and in need of some kind of care, especially following probably a transition from their able state to the point when they become vulnerable, needing help. Mm. Even though some people may not see it that way, but I think that's just the general point of view for me. So it's really valued.
So it's really valued, and you basically two reasons for that, if I understood it. One is like that actually it's given some kind of recognition, so there are resources for carers, so there is some kind of funding for carers. That's a sign that it's valued. Yep. Also, people's interpersonal experience that when they need care, they really do value
sure, the kind of support they get.
Exactly. Okay, thank you for that, Ian. And also we've got a slightly different take in the chats. Thank you, Burungi. They're valued insofar as they save the government money. Okay, which is similar but different, I think, than to Ian's contribution. We've got another contribution in the chats. when I was caring, I did feel valued by the health professionals and involved agencies, but it should be more valued. I know my mother-in-law valued the care I was able to give her. What more value do I need? So again, there's very much the sense, I think, here of being of the value coming from the recognition, whether that's monetary recognition or whether that's recognition by family members or the person who's being cared for. So I think perhaps recognition in the widest sense is a key aspect of actually valuing care. So
Greg, can I say something as well, Samantha?
please, welcome,
yes,
ma'am.
I think it's been valued in British communities and society as well, because there's more and more focus on personalized care and a person-centered approach. And I think a family or next of kin or these informal carers are a big contributor towards those personalized support planner approaches as well, with mental capacity and other things as well. There is more, I think, choice people have to have their carers known to social services or other professionals involved as well. So there is acknowledgement of contributions by informal carers in government as well. And yeah, I think we appreciate the caring role by lots of family members or friends, neighbors, or anyone.
So I think, Mamta, from what you said, what I'm taking is there's an important message here for social workers to be, to be actually communicating that recognition, and that yes, this is something that's valued. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think this is something that coming up in the chats is the government values it, hence cares assessments. However, I do feel other family members do not always value what the carer does, because this causes a lot of family dynamics. So again, it may be that as a social worker, if you're going in with somebody who finds themselves in a caring role and has a non-traditional, in quotation marks, attitude towards caring, that maybe you as a professional are the person who's actually giving them a sense that this is valued. It may not be coming from other people in their extended family, yeah? Or Ian has added, also considering the time invested in providing care, for instance, unpaid role, I think it is valued to some extent. And then we've added in, Lisa's added in, informal carers are not always valued by other family members, yeah? And again, this reflects the culture of the wider family, yeah? For what Lawrence and their collaborators called traditional attitudes towards caring, the wider community, the wider family would value that role, see it as quite important, and people had a sense of self-respect from doing it. But for other people, they may not have that kind of support. So I think it's quite important when you will encounter carers with all kinds of different attitudes towards caring, yeah, and understandings of the value that's given to caring when you meet with them. So I think it's important to think, not to be judgmental about that, but to think about, okay, so how is this person understanding their caring role, and what kind of support do they need? What kind of messages do they need to be hearing? Yeah. Do they maybe they need recognition of the difficulty that the caring role is presenting to them, in terms that they need to do other things in their life in order to feel that they have a life of their own? Or maybe it's that actually they do see that the caring role is really a big part of their life, but they need to understand that services are not there to come in and take over. Services are there to support them and support the person they're caring. And that's going to be different depending on, that approach is going to be different depending on the attitudes, the cultural attitudes of the carer that you're working with. So personal care experience, I'm just jumping into the chats to see what's happening. Personal care experience is that if a carer is involved and the person has savings, then the social services do not want help or support. Let me reread that. Personal experience of ESPASM is that if a carer is involved and the person has savings, then social services do not want to help or support the cared for or the carer. Okay, So this is a sense that like that support from the local authority is quite conditional basically on the person's or the cared for person's financial situation. And again, this is going to land differently with different people. Perhaps people who've got non-traditional understandings of caring roles, they may actually feel that they actually deserve some support. Going back to what Richard said earlier, they feel that they expect this as something that should be coming from the state in terms of supporting people's welfare. And but then other people may, with a more traditional view, may see it as something that they need to provide from their own families. But either way, I think there's a thing about communication here about in terms of means testing and costs. It's quite important to understand these things and to present them to explain them, communicate them clearly to folks. I think there's also a thing here about how can I put this? That services are accessible. Services may not always be in terms of funded services from the local authority. Services could also be information about voluntary groups, information about other services that are available. So I think it's kind of important as well to communicate that you know that support can come in many forms and not just be limited to what's provided by the local authority. Another point, it's good practice to consult family members, even if there are family dynamics. And I think this plays into the issues around what Lawrence and their collaborators labeled as non-traditional carers. That yes, it's important to consult with those other people so that you know, at least it's reflected that like somebody's appreciating what the carer is doing in this dynamic. Yeah. Not to guilt trip people in any way, but just to kind of like sort of to help people to reframe how they're looking at things and understanding things. Another contribution, I've seen quite a few programs geared towards carers, supporting them into work, mental health support grants. So this does show the value of the role. We do have the care eligibility criteria, yeah, which is and carers are valued by carer forums, having the that recognition that comes through lived experience of peers and peer support. So I'm conscious of time at the moment. So we've got about half an hour remaining in this session. So I want to kind of like perhaps drilling down a bit into what is cultural competency. So, okay, just to sum up some of the many contributions, and I'm sure there are many other things that people are thinking about, perhaps making notes themselves, reflecting on in terms of their own experience or their own development. I think what we're hearing is that a lot of folks, a lot of social workers here feel that like the actual official recognition that's there in law, in the carrying out of assessments, the right to having assessments, all that shows that carers are valued. But I just want to also then take you back to that slide that we looked at that said a lot of people who've don't feel, the majority of carers don't feel they've had a carers assessment in the past year. Yeah. So again, if the value is coming from this official recognition, how is that actually being communicated? Is that landing with the people that you're working with? Maybe I'll just leave that as an open question to think about, you know. Let me shift back to slides. Okay, I had hoped to do a breakout group, but I'm thinking we will have time for one breakout group, I think, but because we've got half an hour. So I want to just go back to sharing. And okay, I want you now to take a moment to reflect. And maybe this is where pen and paper come in handy, but just take a moment to reflect on what are your own cultural identities. And how has my own cultural identity shaped my view of caring roles? Do you feel more, and this is just something for you to ask yourself, but do you feel more aligned to the so-called traditional view attitudes towards caring, or do you feel more aligned to non-traditional attitudes towards caring? And what role has your own experience, perhaps in your family life, has that had in influencing? Do you think one attitude is better than another attitude? Where's that coming from? Yeah. What's shaping that? Do you think people should be independent and have their own lives, or do you think that maybe it's there's a role for responsibility and duty in terms of caring for others, or perhaps you have a mixture of both? Yeah, but how is that landing with you? And maybe ask yourself, if you think about what is your cultural background and your views about caring, does that help or hinder your connection to carers and to their communities? So when you're working with a carer, are you influenced by views about them maintaining their independence? We had promoting independence as coming part of caring earlier on, or perhaps if you think a person is feeling ill at ease with their role of caring, do you think they perhaps should be more accepting of their role? How does basically your own cultural background and views help or hinder your connection to carers and communities? I just want to take a moment, perhaps just for yourself, wherever you are, whatever space, to maybe think about those questions. Maybe jot down something in your notebook. Maybe this might be something you might come back to later. But perhaps maybe reflect on times when you felt quite aligned with particular carers, or times that you felt not so aligned with the carers. Maybe you found the carers quite demanding. They're asking for a lot of support, or at least that's how it seemed to you at the time. Or maybe you were trying to offer support and they were saying no, they didn't want it. Maybe reflect on those moments, yeah? And perhaps on the basis of what we've discussed so far, maybe think, how could you approach that differently the next time? So I just want you to give you a moment, maybe just take a breath and have a think. And make some notes just to yourself about how this affects your practice. So what are your cultural identities? How have those cultural identities shaped your view of caring roles? And how does your cultural background and views help or hinder your connection to carers and to communities? Okay, originally I planned to go to a breakout group, but I think we've only got time for one breakout group today. So what I want to do is talk a little bit about cultural competence. So I just took the questions that are originally for the breakout group. We paused for a moment of personal reflection, but let's now talk about cultural competence. The term cultural competence was first introduced into social work by the writings of James Green back in 1982. And a definition of cultural competence, it's the capacity to work effectively with people from a variety of ethnic, cultural, political, economic, and religious backgrounds, while at the same time being aware of how our own culture influences how we view others. So again, that moment of pause where you talked about how does your own cultural attitudes towards caring, and is caring something that you consider natural and virtuous, or is it something that you would see as, might be seen more as a burden, as something that's as an unasked for responsibility? How does that affect how you might see other people providing caring? So cultural competence in this definition, as we can see, it's about being able, the capacity to, is another word for saying being able to work effectively with people from a variety of ethnic, cultural, political, economic, and religious backgrounds. So it's not just pure culture or race we're looking at here, but also people's political beliefs. They may have very different political attitudes than you're holding. Economic, people have different experiences in terms of like wealth or lack of poverty in their lives, and also people have different religious beliefs. So being able to work with people across the whole wide range of difference in our society, and then also being aware of how your own culture influences how you view others. So I'm setting up something and I'm going to like sort of pull back. So if that was cultural competency, I have to say that the term cultural competency in recent years has come in for a lot of criticism in social work. And one of the criticisms has been about self-awareness. Yeah. So it sometimes can be seen as a way of getting comfortable with them, the people who are different from whoever you are. Yeah. And this is criticized because we need to acknowledge that that social or cultural values often privilege certain groups. And I mean, the most obvious one might be white people in British society are seen as being the mainstream, are seen as being the norm that other groups are compared to. Yeah. So this idea of like there are cultural awareness is about like sort of like being comfortable working with difference, and difference is always somebody else. Yeah. And who are they different to? And this can, if it's not really examined or interrogated, may translate into personal values and behavior that are discriminatory or unconsciously exclusionary. So I think thinking about what we've just talked about, like different attitudes towards caring, yeah, with those different attitudes towards caring, I mean, you may naturally feel attuned to one particular way of thinking about caring or another way of caring. Does that mean that you unconsciously may judge carers that you're working with, that it may influence the conversation? How much of a conversation do you have? Do you just kind of go in there, do the basics, get out again? Or do you actually give space to exploring what's going on for the person? Which, as we've seen from Lawrence and et al., is quite important in terms of like doing that work of actually having a conversation and including the person in the process is really important in itself for transforming how supported the carer feels. Yeah, whether that's for a non-traditional person, for a carer with a non-traditional perspective, recognizing that they may need to do or engage in other activities than caring, or for a person with a more traditional attitude towards caring, recognizing that actually, yes, they need to take some time for themselves and they need to be able to feel that accessing services is not a sign of some kind of personal failure or in their caring role. Yeah. So doing that work requires a degree of attunement to people. Yeah. So if you already kind of think, well, this is my view, and then there are these kind of people who are not like me, these, them in quotation marks, that could function to lead to unconsciously excluding, unconsciously kind of very quickly going over the assessment process so as to not fully involve them. Also, cultural competence, a lot of the literature about cultural competence focuses on ethnic and racial group identities, yeah? And often it talks about culture, but actually it's talking about different races. And this can be problematic in that it does not allow an individual to define their own salient identities. So people can be read as being, you're a member of the white community, you're a member of the Black community, you're a member of the South Asian community. And actually, people are a lot more, need to be given space to be able to identify their own identities and to talk about the lived intersections of these identities, which may be about race and ethnicity, it may be about the history of the community that they identify with, but also can be about their gender, whether they live as a man or a woman in that community, their gender identity. Again, maybe for people whose birth identities is not the same as their lived identities, and also sexual orientation. But we could add to this. We could add to this economic status. These things. There are many things that are important for people's identities, and they change depending on situations. So it's important in terms of cultural competency not to be just thinking about things in terms of what group, ethnic group people are identified as belonging to. There have been criticism for the approach of cultural competency because sometimes it can seem like you're just trying to teach people about all the different kinds of cultures and habits and religious beliefs and other signifiers of difference, teaching people about that, and that's somehow about knowing broad descriptions of various groups' identities, which is kind of what we did earlier on when we looked at LGBTQIA, when we looked at Black, Asian, and minority ethnic, even when we looked at those broad, very broad, different cultural attitudes towards caring. Knowing these broad descriptions of various group identities, that doesn't translate into knowing the life and experiences of an individual client, yeah? So it can be helpful sometimes in thinking about what kind of questions to ask, yeah? When we looked at LGBTQ plus identities, asking, so who is involved in caring, not just thinking about like, is their birth family involved in a person's caring, right? So it's helpful to know that, but actually it doesn't tell you the life experiences of the person. Only they can tell you that. So you need to really be open, and you can't just like expect that this course or any course is going to equip you with all the knowledge that you need, yeah? Cultural competence has also been criticized in terms of failures to challenge systemic inequalities. The majority of cultural competence social work literature is focused on practitioners learning about others as a means to combat inequality, but it often doesn't talk about structural forces such as poverty, such as racism, that underlie health and social disparities. So we need to acknowledge that that the differences that we see are often being influenced by structural experiences, yeah, by people's economic situation, by either interpersonal or institutional racism. These things affect affect people's experiences, and sometimes they need to be named and they need to be challenged as part of our social work practice. So the idea of cultural competency is being developed further by adding this concept of cultural humility. Cultural humility is a process, yeah? it's not an endpoint. You don't, just having a certificate of attending this course doesn't mean that we've even begun or we've completed our learning. Cultural humility is a process of committing to an ongoing relationship with our service users, with their carers, and the communities that they're located in, and our colleagues, because we between us have so much knowledge and experiences, and this requires humility as individuals that we're continually engaged in self-reflection and self-critique. So instead of engaging as social workers in a descriptive process of the others, this community does this, that community does that, this other community works this way. It's not about mastering a description of difference. It's really about like thinking about self-reflection. As asked you earlier on, like how do your attitudes towards caring, your personal attitudes of caring, influence how you work with a particular carer? Yeah. How may their attitudes different from yours or align with yours? Yeah. And how does that affect the relationship? Are you able to work with across the differences? Now, earlier on, Lawrence et al., they suggest some ways to work with these differences. Yeah. But this is something we need to ask ourselves as practitioners, how we do that. So it requires self-reflection on unintentional, yeah, because as social workers, you already came into this profession with a commitment, I'm sure, to social justice, to equality, to valuing diversity. But it's about like, what about unintentional, meaning that you don't spend as much time with that carer. You think that you don't, okay, people have said people have rights, but how much has that been actually explained to the carer that they have a right to a separate assessment, that they are having an assessment? If they have an assessment, how might that affect them economically? Yeah. Not taking the time, what are their views about caring? How are they feeling about the caring process? Not taking the time to do that can lead to unintentionally reinforcing patterns of racist exclusion, of economic classist exclusion, or of homophobic exclusion. So basically, we need to be able to reflect on what we're doing with carers. So it means sometimes pausing and checking in. And sometimes a good way to do that is actually to check in with groups, check in with your peers, but ask yourself, are you giving the same levels of service to all the carers that you work with? Now, you may be thinking, well, some people need more support than others, but on what is the basis that you made that decision? Is it based on how closely their view of caring aligns with yours? So for cultural humility as a practice in social work, it requires reflection. It also requires individual and institutional accountability, which I guess is what we were talking about here, in terms of asking ourselves, how are we providing an equitable service? It also requires reflecting on and mitigating systemic power imbalances. So it can be seen as a kind of a process, and it's something that happens on the interpersonal level of your social work practice. So there's your individual accountability as a social worker, which is ongoing, which involves ongoing learning, reflect, and critical self-reflection. But also there's institutions. What resources are the resources that are your institution, your local authority providing? Are they actually accessible? Are you keeping track? Is your organization keeping track of, does the profile of assessments that are provided, does that match the demographics of your community, of the wider community in your borough, or communities in your borough? So there's also a level of institutional accountability, which also involves ongoing learning, critical self-reflection. And these two things basically need to work together, both your organization and you as an individual. Yeah. So in your individual practice is about accountability, but also in your organization, that should be like shifting the gears for your organization. Your organization needs to have some way of institutional learning, of actually thinking about how is it serving the communities. And this is the only way that, this is how we can basically deal with the power balances which are inbuilt in our working. Yeah. Some social workers often feel to the service user and the carer, the social worker seems like a very powerful person, but as a social work practitioner, you may not feel powerful in the organization that you are in. So it's thinking about how is the voices of practitioners heard in the organization, how are the voices of communities heard by the organization. So this, I'm going to, whoops, I didn't mean to totally stop sharing there, sorry. I want to look at these questions, and actually I will put them into the chats. So, I'd like you to consider in the last few minutes, if we may, what are the social and economic barriers that impact on carers' abilities to maintain and sustain their caring relationships? And what specific experiences are my clients having that might be related to larger or systemic issues? And finally, how does my practice behaviors actively challenge imbalances and involve marginalized communities? So actually, of those three questions, I think, because we've only got a few minutes left, I think perhaps in the chats, what I'd like to invite people to speak to is, how does my practice behaviors actively challenge power imbalances and involve marginalized communities?
If I can come in,
Please do.
we may try, but I guess it's largely a systemic issue, because the way carers are treated, in my experience, I've worked in 4 different boroughs in London, and I've seen some disparity in way in which carers are treated, you know, assessment and service provision and sort of things. So, and there are some that actually can be very generous, because I remember my experience with Islington. But when I went to Ealing and Redbridge, where I am at the moment, they more focus on these austerity issues and stuff. And it's actually making it difficult, even you, the social worker, to be very careful, because you may tell the carer that, oh, you're going to get this, or you're likely to get this. And when they get enticed and apply for it, the system says no. So you got to be very careful sometimes, you know, because you don't have the confidence that it's definitely going to happen. The system, like the act, actually give the right for carers to be assessed on their own right for the first time, but it's not well implemented. Or even when the way it's implemented is not really in the interest of the person, because they take into account their contribution and stuff. And that's it deters people anyway. When you say, oh, you'll be assessed financially for this, they get deterred. Well, why would I have to? Let me continue with whatever caring I can give to my person. So it's implementation. That's what, to me, I think it's largely systemic, because we are just there to implement what the councils are saying or the borough we work for are saying. So if they're really keen in promoting carers team. They have to really give us that power, but not go there and not know and not sure what's going to happen if you promise something to a carer and it turns out different.
I think that's a very important point you've made there, and it, Richard, and it chimes with the ideas about austerity that came up earlier. I think so. I want to building on that, actually ask, and you don't have to answer this, Richard, but maybe invite people to think about, okay, maybe there's limits in our organization because of the resourcing available in the local borough that we're working in. How do you know? How can that be? You know, how can we be accountable for that with service users? How can we how could we also, in terms of accountability, how do we account to our organization in terms of like what is being provided and the limitations on what's being provided? It's a big question, I think.
It is a big question actually, because we have a duty actually to challenge some of those things, but where would it go? That's the thing, because sometimes when you challenge and you see a difference, you'll be more motivated. But if your immediate or the line management will not condone some of those challenges, when you don't have access to the higher people there that make the decision, the strategic people that do the decision, you on the operational level, or let's say we are the street level, we come up with something, pass it to the operational cannot progress it to the strategic. So not that social workers don't care, we do, because when you go, you really see the dire need in which some carers are. But the system that dictates is what sometimes hinder our own passion, because we too need to be, feel that, yes, I've made a difference. But if my advocacy doesn't go anywhere, there's less motivation.
So you can
less motivation.
In a negative spiral there, where it's like the social workers feeling that like that
feel overwhelmed.
Yeah, overwhelmed, and that the organization's is, how do I put this, not responsive on a strategic level to the issues that the practitioners are encountering on the front line. But maybe the accountability then needs to come through other ways, perhaps through professional organizations, perhaps through BASWA. Perhaps it's about taking active roles to make sure that social worker voices are heard, or perhaps it can be about like promoting the voices of carers so that they are actually heard by the organization. Yeah. So, I mean, somebody else earlier on mentioned the idea of carers forums. Now, obviously, these forums have different levels of influence depending on the local authority, how much value it gives to them, but they could be ways of amplifying carers' voices, and of making sure that there is some kind of accountability on an institutional level, instead of all the accountability being placed on the individual practitioner. I don't know what other people are thinking in terms of how we can be accountable and how our organizations can be accountable to service users and carers. Please, somebody wants to come in. I can't quite see who it is though.
Yeah, I just.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Sorry. In my experience, I can say that NUAM is actually very generous, because I have had experience where NUAM has bent forth backwards to support carers and making sure that care doesn't break down. We have carers support, carers training, and is part of the assessment, even the review. In my experience, carers we put support together, whether gym, to ensure that carers support, is maintained. Because I always say in my practice, I take my hat off to carers, whether paid or unpaid, and family carers as well. And in my experience, I have seen lots and lots of support to ensure that carers have their own well-being, physically, mentally, emotionally, is supported to be able to continue in their caring role. whether by direct payments, whether they will be referring them to the GP or respite, residential respite, so that they will also will have a break. So I think Noam is doing well.
Thank you. In that response, there were so many things. There was ideas about like carers having some time for themselves. You were talking about referrals to gyms. You were also talking about respite. You were talking about whole range of different services. And again, this is going to fall differently with different carers. Some carers may think, yeah, I need time for myself. I need to go to the gym. Some people may think, actually, you know, the person I'm caring for, they need a service. They need a break. Again, different local authorities are going to put charging in different ways, which obviously affects experiences across local authorities. And I'm conscious that people are here from many different boroughs. So there will be different perspectives and different experiences of practitioners in those different boroughs. In the chats, we have ways to how our practice behaviors can actively challenge power imbalances. We have in the chats, be an advocate for carers, evidence-based approaches to help acknowledge care support. Again, I realize we've got a few minutes over time, and I really do apologize. There was a lot to pack in today. I hope it's been useful. I had hoped that we could have some facilitated breakout rooms, but unfortunately, my bad, we ran over time. But again, if anybody would like to make any comments in the chats or say anything, please do now. Or also being respectful of your time, if you need to leave now, that's totally fine too.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.